Ministry of Finance and the Public Service presents Let's Talk Finance, a feature exploring the various elements of the economic program.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Finance here on Nationwide 90 FM. This is the third and final episode, let's call it that, of this look at the Revenue Appeals Division and how it has been conducting its business since 2015 when it took on a new look. It's a part of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and its commissioner, Dr. Deloree Staple Chambers, has been my guest for the past 2 weeks, and she has obliged by making a third appearance. Let's get right into it now, Dr. Staple Chambers. The different tax types that you find, well, the tax types that people normally lodge an appeal for some issue or the other against.
All right. You can appeal any tax that falls under the Income Tax Act, the Customs Act,
Yes.
the GCT Act, the Special Consumption Tax Act, or the Transfer Tax Act. The bulk of our appeals that we receive, as you can imagine, will be income tax and GCT.
Yes.
Customs is between 10 to 20%, depending on the year. And then we do have a few withholding tax. We received our first assessment for guest accommodation room tax last year. And from time to time, we'll receive transfer tax applications. So those are mainly the tax act. So under the income tax, you can appeal your income tax assessment, personal income tax assessment, company tax assessment, PAYE, education tax. And then you can also appeal bauxite levy and asset tax.
If I lodge an appeal under one of those tax types and I lose, am I liable to pay anything?
Oh yes, the tax become payable.
No, not the tax itself, but is there, after the process has ended and
Right.
I have my decision, my appeal has been thrown out, am I likely to pay anything on top of the tax which I was liable to pay from the first time?
Yeah, okay. Well, if there was interest and penalties attached to that assessment, then yes,
Very
those
well.
would become payable.
Give me a scenario, though, Dr. Staple Chambers, of a query that an entity or an individual would have made under any of the headings that you just went through.
A query?
Yeah, well, no. An appeal against, for instance, what I'm driving at is this: an income tax challenge that would have been leveled by an individual who says, well, this assessment is wrong, is way out of kilter, I don't owe this, and I want to challenge the amount that I'm being asked to pay.
Well, that situation can arise in any instance. The thing is, persons would dispute the assessment if they believe that the basis on which the calculations or the assessment, the interpretation of their business was done.
That's what I'm driving at, right.
Does not accord with their understanding of reality.
Right.
So the tax department may have done an audit, and based on the records that they have, based on information on the industry and other players in the market and so on, they expect your tax to be of a certain level, and they would raise an assessment accordingly. And the taxpayer may say, well, be that as it may, this is not my situation for these reasons. It could be that if they say they were the operator of a small shop or a wholesale,
Yes.
then they may say, we suffered from flooding, and so we weren't selling goods for 3 of the 12 months.
Yes.
And stuff. So those are some of the things that can arise.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if an individual, well, it's almost the same situation, and someone in the sole tradership who has that kind of business, but those reasons that they would cite up front as why they don't owe the quantum of tax
Right.
that the revenue says they do owe, those are the things that would be considered when making the decision as to
Right.
whether or not they're liable.
Exactly. So once you make an appeal, you're given an opportunity to lay out,
Right.
to build your case to prove that that the assessment is incorrect. A matter of fact, you have a legal obligation under the law to prove that the TAJ or the customs was incorrect in arriving at the assessment. So how our process facilitate that is that you are allowed to lay out those submissions in a meeting. The TAJ or the customs, who we call the respondent, would be there. And so you submit, lay out your evidence, all the information that you think is relevant to support the position that you have, and then the TAJ or the customs would be allowed to respond. So they would lay out their facts, they would explain how they come up with their decision, and then we are the ones now who compare and contrast both sets of circumstances. If there's a need for clarification, we request that or we ask the questions. And we also ensure that both parties have all the information that was gathered or discovered in the appeals process. So that, say for instance, the TAJ submits a statement of case to outline how they arrive at the assessment. But this was not shared with the taxpayer before they come to appeal. We share that with the taxpayer. So the taxpayer can prepare themselves to respond to all the issues that were raised by the TAJ. And so it is a fair and open discussion that happens, or discourse that happens. And then in the end, we are the ones who make a decision. And our decision is based on the law, the facts, and the evidence.
You may have said so last week, but I'm sure we'll have new listeners today, so if you could repeat, I'd be obliged. The responsibility of convening a hearing. What if the taxpayer on appeal insists that, I know you've looked at the documents for the parties in the dispute and you believe that a hearing is not necessary, but I believe that a hearing is necessary and I'm coming with my representative and I'd appreciate very much that there is a hearing, but from the perspective of your division,
right,
you don't think that's necessary. What happens from there, and whose responsibility is it to say, parties, let's convene for a hearing?
All right. So what the law allows right now is for the commissioner to determine what methodology she wants to use to deal with the appeal. So if it is that the officers at RAD determine that this appeal can be heard without having any further discussion or a formal hearing, based on the information that we have received from the taxpayer and the respondent, we can decide what decision should be. And we will communicate that now to the taxpayer. And the taxpayer will say, oh, but I want to be heard. I require a meeting. If the taxpayer does that, then we are obliged to by law. So we'll have to convene the meeting.
What about cases then where, I don't want to quote a figure, it may be too small or too large, but there's a tax bill that the taxpayer insists they don't owe that quantum, and it is in the appeals process, but it takes 18 months for resolution. What happens to that tax bill? Does the taxpayer pay until resolution? So if they, as we say in Jamaica, if them win,
right,
they get back the money. Or if they lose, well, they paid already and maybe they have to pay interest on top of it. What happens in that situation? Because I know that's a thorny one for some people.
Right. All right. At the very beginning, there is some variance in terms of how the tax is treated when the matter is under appeal, depending on the tax type. So for some taxes, the assessment is put in abeyance. So it is suspended, meaning that the tax department would not move to collect. But for some taxes, you have to pay it. So like the Customs Act, it requires that you put up a deposit to secure the duty demanded by the Commissioner of
Deposit
Customs.
of what percentage?
No, the duties demanded by the Commission, you put that up as a deposit. Same thing for transfer tax. If it is that your property was valued and the transfer tax is calculated and you are disputing it, you have to pay the transfer tax even though you intend to appeal. So those are the two tax types that vary. For the other tax types, the assessment would be in abeyance, so you would not pay. Collecting it would go on hold. Once the appeal is resolved, if it is resolved in your favor, then you if you had paid the taxes before or put up the deposit, then you would get a refund. If it is one of the tax types where the amount was suspended, it becomes payable. If you had won the appeal, then there would be no obligation, and you'd have been refunded if you had paid. If you lose the appeal, or if the appeal was partially in your favor, meaning that you'll have to pay some more, but not the full amount that was originally assessed, then that amount becomes payable. And if there are penalties and interest accruable, then those would now be payable at this point.
So for monies that are, when the revenue division loses an appeal, I'm putting it that way for ease of communication. When after the process, the appeals process has been exhausted,
right,
and the taxpayer wins, right?
Okay.
Let's put it that way. Good. When the taxpayer wins, and the money is due to be refunded, is the money refunded as in the form it was deposited, or is it held as credit for the next tax cycle?
George, that is now a question for the tax departments to answer. I really don't have the full information. But I know that refunds are paid in some instances. Say, for instance, in the customs context, that you would have had revenue deposit receipt, so you would present that to receive your refund, and that refund can be used to pay other customs duties.
I recognize it may be a difficult question for you, but you have to understand, I'm channeling the question of the person who would find themselves at the appeal desk in the first place. And they, you know how they say sometimes, when dealing business with certain arms of government, when they take cash from you, they sometimes give you back credit when if you have successfully navigated the process, when it is that you would want back your cash to do your business. So it was a question asked from that perspective.
Right. But let me just hasten to say this. Once we issue a decision, that is it for us.
Right.
Right. So we are not involved in the collections
Excellent.
thereafter,
Yes.
or the settling of the account thereafter.
Yes.
You would now have to go back to the tax department, the relevant tax department or the customs, to deal with the payments or the receipt of refunds thereafter.
Those persons know, Dr. Staple Chambers, who will say the proximity between the Revenue Appeals Division and the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, it doesn't lend itself to fairness when dealing with us, the taxpayer. What do you say to that?
Why? Because of the distance?
No, because of the proximity, because of the relation. You are a division of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Let me finish. The government wants to collect our money, and they don't want to give our justice. So this is just a mirage to make it seem as if it's a fair and transparent process and that we'll get justice at the end. At the end of the day, we'll have to pay the tax and move on, because we're not going to get any justice from the division in real terms. Address that.
All right. So when you look around the globe, there are a lot of jurisdictions that has their appeal formation just like ours, right? So it's not that we are so wrong in terms of legal arrangements. What our system does, the way in which we are arranged, yes, we are a part of the Ministry of Finance, but we are not situated within the hierarchy that deals with the assessment and the collection. We are distinctly separated. We do not get involved in the assessment of revenue or the collection of revenue. A matter of fact, our legislation prevents us from even increasing the assessment, even if when we hear the appeal, we realize that the person was undercharged. We can't even collect the additional amount that is due. That is how much the legislation has ensured that we are not executing anything resembling assessment or collections. The second thing is that only the courts can overrule a decision of the Commissioner of Revenue Appeals. The Minister of Finance doesn't have that prerogative, neither the Financial Secretary.
Yes.
So those are some of the robustness built into the mechanism, the legislation and the administrative arrangements to ensure that integrity is preserved and independence is experienced.
So it is with confidence and assurance that you say to the taxpayer, come and you get justice.
Certainly. We are waiting to serve you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time. It has been my pleasure. One UTech person to another. It's good to meet us. Yes, I always take the opportunity to acknowledge that. And I hope you continue to supporting France at international football. And it wasn't just a one-off.
I've been with France since 1998.
She's been with France for 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen,
Amen.
Dr. Deloree Staple Chambers, Commissioner of the Revenue Appeals Division, under the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's it for Let's Talk Finance. Next week.
That was Let's Talk Finance, brought to you by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.